Okay. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. In today's discussion in the Diapoint virtual picnic, we will be talking about diabetes at school. I am Pamela Durant, the founder and managing director of DiapointME, and diabetes at school is a very personal topic. As the parent of a child with type 1 diabetes, after diagnosis, my biggest concern was, how am I going to send my child to school? He was only 20 months old, so I was working full time and he was going to nursery and finding my way around that. And then when he went off to big boy school, as we called it, it was a huge step. So it's something that's not easy to do. And I'm super happy that you all are here today. And before I introduce our guest, I actually want to share with you, just before the call, I've been working on different things, and I looked at my WhatsApp to see if there was anything I needed to respond to. And I had over 80 messages in my son's school WhatsApp group. I don't know how many parents are in there, but this is only for the grade that he is in. And I actually went back and counted, and 30 minutes ago, there were 82 messages, and there's been more coming in since that time. All of the messages are about where to buy paper, where to get folders and notebooks. A couple are about, the start times and staggered start times. There's nothing about COVID. It's all about school supplies. And even though this will be the 11th year my child is going to a school with diabetes, my heart still sinks. It's not easy to do, and nobody can understand the challenges that you're facing until you actually have to face it. Now, I'm not, upset or angry at those parents, and I understand why it's a concern. You want your child to be ready. You want them to have school supplies. We want that for our children also, but we want them to also not have to worry as much about their day-to-day diabetes management. We want it to go smoothly and facilitate it as much as possible. So that's why we are all here today, and it's such an important topic. So thank you for joining us. And special thank you to our guest, Sara Adhami. I say guest, but she's one of us. She's an accredited practicing dietitian. She's a credentialed diabetes educator. She has more than 10 years of experience in this area. And she's worked in both Australia and Dubai. Some of you may actually know her. And she's passionate about diabetes education that's patient-centered and the use of diabetes technology to help guide education and diabetes care. In her current position, she works as the diabetes educator in Dubai at the Mediclinic Hospital. And she is a key touch point for families when they're getting their child ready to go to school with diabetes. She is one of the key people that helps her patients develop their diabetes medical management plan for school. So she has also extensive experience in this area from the clinical side. So that's why I'm super happy she's here to talk to us about this today, to share also her expertise and insight. So welcome, Sara. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Pam. I really appreciate the introduction, and it's a pleasure to support this cause. And look, I think the more awareness you raise, the more you advocate for diabetes, especially type 1 diabetes, the more people will accept, the more action you can take into place. And we were speaking so much about just from the government authorities' point of views, like, just inclusion and the importance that children, no matter who they are and what they have, they should have the equal rights to education like all other children. They should be able to participate in all forms of learning and activity and sports and camps and excursions, etc. And so this conversation is important. I think it is something that every parent needs to take a proactive approach in. And so, yeah, today I'm happy to sort of go through all the nitty-gritty with you.
Thank you so much. So very loosely, to give you all an idea what we're going to be talking about, we're going to talk about planning, why it's important. We're going to talk about the plan that you need to take to school for your child's medical plan, and how we might manage the day-to-day, some tips, tricks, thoughts, ideas, and how to deal with some special situations, because diabetes, no 2 days are ever alike, no two children are ever alike, and no 2 days of school are ever alike either. So there's a lot of things that can come up that might make you change your routine, sometimes planned, sometimes not planned. So without further ado, intro, why do we plan? I just want to say a couple things about planning. One of the reasons we plan in anything in life is to mitigate risk. That is not necessarily risk that something bad is going to happen, but risk that things will not go as we expect them to. And with diabetes, everyone here knows that no matter how much we plan, things still may not go as we would like them to. But the more that we plan, the better chance we have of things going well, and the better chance that when they don't go well, that we will have action plans in place and be able to kind of follow up on the various things. So decrease your risks for the year. Also, it opens the door for communication immediately with the team that you'll be working with in the school. And you'll learn about your child's rights legally, no matter where in the world you're living. In most developed countries, children with diabetes do have rights, and that's important wherever you're living, that you become familiar with those and at least know what they are and where to find them. And as I mentioned before, we just want our child's year to go smoothly, so it really supports us in helping our child. And the first step in the planning process is going to meet with your physician or your diabetes educator and talking to them about the diabetes medical management plan. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sara so she can take us through what is included in that. This is something you want to do before you get to school, and it's really important to sit down and do it face-to-face, especially if your child's newly diagnosed. After a few years, when I felt a little more confident with it, what I would do is take the draft of last year's plan and I would write in my thoughts, what I thought might work and might not work. And then I would take it to my doctor, and I still do that. And I have him review it, and then we talk about it. So Sara, can you please walk us through this very lengthy document that we should have?
Okay. So first of all, I think, it is so important to have it. When you think about how many hours in a day your child spends at school, they spend, a good 8 hours or so of the day at school. It's a big chunk of their lives that is spent in a facility that's away from their home, and they're potentially in the care of people other than yourselves. And of course, you as the parents, you always feel like you're the best person to look after your child, but you have to let go to them to grow and get educated, and they need to get out. I mean, now we're living in COVID times, and yes, some people are choosing to keep their kids at home, and I'm sure if I were a parent with a child with type 1 diabetes, forget the COVID part, just having them near me and being able to know exactly what they're eating, and I'm going to decide on their doses, and I'm going to decide on their corrections and all the rest of it, then of course it's a relief, because there's less that you have to leave in the capable hands, or hopefully the capable hands of a nurse or somebody else in the classroom. But going back to the template, so it is generally a template. We start off with it's approximately 7 to 8 pages. It can be longer, but it really is basically an agreement between you as the parent of the child with diabetes and your healthcare team on how your child is managed. So it'll go through obviously the type 1 diabetes, the types of insulin that they take, where their injections are usually given. I'll usually specify that the long-acting insulin is given at home. I may specify whether it's given at night or in the morning. And I usually will specify how many injections potentially may be required during the school hours of the fast-acting insulin. Then we have the date of when it's been done and review as needed. So the review of the care plan or the school plan can happen as insulins change, or as anything specific in the school plan needs changing. So it's on a need to be sort of basis. Then you go into understanding hypoglycemia. And I think one of the scariest things about sending your child to school with diabetes is how they're going to be managed if they have hypoglycemia. But before even the treatment is, raising awareness about what can cause a hypoglycemia, what are the symptoms that your child may be experiencing. And so there will be about a half a page there on just the causes, the symptoms, and then you've got also the management. So step by step on what needs to be given. Now, if you're sitting with me, I can be specific to write down what you prefer to give as a fast-acting carbohydrate to treat the hypoglycemia. I can also be writing the specific symptoms your child experiences when they have hypoglycemia. I can highlight them. So that way, if a child looks like they're looking very tired and sleepy or pale, this is something that we can highlight as the signs that your child could potentially be having hypoglycemia. And then, of course, back to you to go through these symptoms with the main class teachers or PE teacher or nurses. So that way, if a teacher's in the classroom and she sees something in your child that could potentially indicate hypoglycemia, she may just quietly pull them to the side and say, if they're wearing a glucose monitor, or if they're not, she'll just get them to check their glucose levels, because she's aware of what could potentially be causing hypoglycemia. And this is especially important for the younger children who may not be able to express their feelings, or they're too shy, they haven't had diabetes for a very long time, so they're just not sure how to deal with it. So the hypoglycemia. And then we also have the section on what to do in an emergency case of hypoglycemia. And again, I ask the parents whether they are sending a glucogen pen to school and keeping an up-to-date one in the school. I do personally feel that it's better to include the use of a glucogen pen in the case of an unconscious hypo, where the child is unable to swallow and take in a fast-acting glucose. Of course, then followed up by calling the ambulance and the parents. I would say most parents agree to put that in the school plan, but it is up to you. And then we go into the glucose monitoring. So how is the glucose being monitored in the school, and what is the child able to do by themselves? And that's a really important point, that you need to be able to show the capabilities of the child, what they can do, what they're independent doing, and what they need supervision with or even assistance with. So when it comes to glucose monitoring, are they able to check their glucose levels on their own? Are they using a glucose monitor? Will they need to have a smartphone with them? All these things need to be indicated in the school plan. And then from there, we have the injection time. So when do they usually get an injection? So whether it's at snack time or just at lunchtime, when do we give corrections? Should that be at the snack time as well as the lunchtime? And of course, if they're on flexible dosing, then you attach the dosing chart. So it's referred back to the dosing chart that they may have, so that the nurse is not confused about how much insulin to give. Then you also have the PE section. So what is a safe level for your child to participate in PE? And so they need to be, again, checking their glucose level before that. So it's an indicator for the teacher to remind the child to check the glucose level and what is the safe level. And the snacks that can be provided, which of course is the responsibility of the parent to keep providing those snacks and topping up those snacks in the child's bag. And then the roles and responsibilities of the school, the parent, the healthcare professional. It needs to be signed by all three parties. So it needs to be first signed by the healthcare team and the parents. So obviously, once we discuss it together, I sign it, they then take it to the school. You need to sit down with the principal or the main class teacher or teachers, the nurse, the PE, whoever. The more I think you get involved with the school teachers and staff, the better it is, I think, and then get a signature on board there so that it's agreed. So it may not have every single thing clear to the nurse or the teacher, but it's a good starting point. It's your go-to portal for reference for the nursing staff or the teachers. It's your education point where you can start educating. Of course, you can add on from that. We can add instructions on how to give glucogen. We can add instructions on correct insulin injection techniques. So as needed, where the staff need extra support, we're happy to provide that support. I know parents that have given PowerPoint presentations beforehand in conjunction with the school plan. So it really is up to you how much further you want to go from there. But I think just to have that document in the beginning just formalizes things and has all that information there for you. Sorry, I rambled on a lot.
No. But this is diabetes, and this is how the plan is, and it feels like it's so much information. So thank you. That was an amazing overview. And I am one of those parents that gives a PowerPoint presentation. I always have. And because of all these documents and everything that I do, that's why I created an online course, and the presentation that I give is in there. The reason I give a presentation is because it helps me remember everything that I need to talk about. Because I'm sure if I go in there without anything, I'm going to forget something. And it's much more appealing to look at than the document that's the medical management plan. What I do is, and you can do it and there's many ways to do it. And this year also with COVID, I'm really not doing it the way that I usually do. A couple reasons. One, my son is older, and I know that, you know, the school he goes to is very well prepared, and they've had other type 1s, and he can manage himself. But usually what I would do is I reach out to the school health office and I ask them, because we don't always know who the teachers are right away, I ask them to please call a meeting at a time convenient for everyone with the health office and the teachers. And then that's when I would go through the presentation about what diabetes is, just very basic, the difference between type 1, type 2, why does type 1 happen? What are the symptoms in my child for high blood sugar, low blood sugar, and what needs to happen? And that also helps the health office communicate with the teachers so that teachers know how to, you know, call the nurse or what to do if they need to, because sometimes those are not things that are really discussed because, you know, there's only maybe 1 or 2 type 1s in the school. So it's not a question that a teacher would be used to asking, but it does give them something to think about and fosters the communication. So having it in a presentation is a very high level brief form. Then with the nurse in the health office or nurses, I go into the details of the diabetes medical management plan. The teacher's not going to really be worried about the dosing here. You know, if you're in a country where the teachers are giving injections and making dosing decisions, then for sure you want them involved in that discussion. But for the details that I've talked about with my doctor and diabetes team, I go through that with the school health office. And as Sara pointed out, it is not set in stone. Usually after 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes I notice doses have to change because it's a new schedule for everybody and the way their little bodies are behaving to the new program. Sometimes the doses are different than what we expected. So we'll go back, we'll update it, or, you know, I make a change in the document. Glucagon, everybody needs it. As parents, we all need to know how to use it for sure. And I do have a glucagon. I'm not sure which one they have here, glucagon, in my son's school. And I teach the health office how to use it. It's scary. I've had to use it twice, not at school, but at home. And I keep my expired ones, and I take that to the
Give
school.
them to me. I like
you want some? I got some.
All of you. You have expired. They're great for education.
Yes, they are. I have some I'll give you. I give some to the school, and I still have some because fortunately you don't use them.
I hope they expire. Exactly.
You want them to expire. So what I do is I take an expired one to the school and show the nurses, this is what it is. This is how it works. Now, could I have done that really, you know, kind of the first year? I did, but I was not really confident in talking about it. But it's important because they themselves, even though they're nurses, they have medical training, they're trained very general, you know, in very general terms. They don't come with the background that they're diabetes educators and they know all of this. So sometimes we learn together, and that's okay too. So those are just some things that I wanted to say are super important that Sara pointed out.
Can I also add that I know that so many of you have regular phone calls with the nurse, and many would say, oh, they just call me at break time or at lunchtime and I tell them how much to give. So, I mean, most people I know do have a school plan, but I've met like newer patients who haven't had a school plan sent to school. And so I just feel like, especially if they're newer to having diabetes, rather than just saying to the nurse, just call me, I think having that documented and having that information there and going through a little bit of that background education just gives reassurance to the nurse, gives reassurance to the school, and that's less likely for them to sort of, we've heard stories of how schools get scared of having children with type 1 diabetes, and they might feel overwhelmed about all the different steps that are involved in looking after your child. But I think when you show them that, you know, these are the main areas that need to be focused on, these are the main times of the day that I want my child to come to the nurse, I'm happy to be available over the phone, but you have a reference point for potential treatment of hypoglycemia. It's there, it's documented, and time after time, it gets easier and easier. And I think it just sets up a much better foundation for you as the parent, and creates a better environment for your child so that they're not stressed or anxious, or you're not stressed or anxious about your child going to school.
That's really good advice. My son's nursery, they used to call, and I got really used to that. And you know, where I was working at the time too, at first they thought it was a little crazy, but you know, they just got used to it. You're just rattling off all of these numbers. When we transitioned into primary school, they're like, nope, we're not going to call you. I was like, what? What do you mean you're not going to call me? But and that was a lot of control to let go of. And I think a lot of people, you know, now my son didn't have a CGM back then, and he has one that I'm not able to see on a shared app. A lot of parents can see, you know, through the app what's happening. And if you want to share that with the nurse, that's also, a lot of people find that helpful. So you can watch, you know, as a parent. And I understand when they're smaller, and when especially also new diagnosed, you may want to do that for a short time, but the social benefits of letting go, dare I say, when the time is right, not everyone, there's no set formula that like after 2 weeks you must let go and let them do it. There's no set time. It takes a lot to learn about diabetes. Like I said, even for some of the school nurses, and there might be some things after some time you go back and you re-educate on. But there's a lot to be said also for the social aspect of this, and the time that if your school nurse is educated well enough and she's following your directives and the child's diabetes medical management plan correctly, then that child will be back to his classroom or wherever his classmates are as quickly as possible. Adding the phone call, even though it seems quick, it adds to that time. And for my experience, for my son, the biggest challenge was not the diabetes care. It was the fear of missing out of what his peers were doing. That was the hardest part. So we came up with a way where, you know, before an activity he loved, when he was very small, before music day, Miss Fran would come and with her guitar, and they would sing. And before Miss Fran came, they'd make sure they check his blood sugar, because otherwise it'd be too late. And, you know, these little kind of workarounds so that your child feels like this is not interfering with their daily life. And that sets them up for success in the future when they're ready to start taking over it themselves. All right, so I think we've kind of exhausted the medical management plan, but for sure, any questions, put them in the chat and we'll be happy to answer. So now that you have once you have your plan and you've met with the school and then you're ready to go, and the first day of school comes, then you've got to start managing your day to day. What do you do? So Sara, I've got the way I do it, but I think it's good to hear from the way you do it, because the way I do it, it's probably, you know, it's definitely not perfect. It's worked for me. But what do you have any comments?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just thinking of lunch boxes, and I know how much I hate doing school lunch boxes, but we have to do them, and we have to feed our kids right. And there is that added step for all you parents out there of knowing what you're packing into your child's lunchbox and how they're going to get their insulin, how is it going to work, how is it going to be calculated, etc. So it really, I mean, as much as we can be as detailed as possible in the school plan, I really dislike when I get some of the school plans, because some of them have their own templates, and they ask me, and the parents will say to me, can you fill this in for the school? And I'll be like, well, I could fill it in, but we also have our own template. And I'll have a look at it anyway. And I look at it and it will say, what will the child be eating for break and for lunch? Now, come on. How can we be knowing every day what the child is going to be eating? Are we going to be giving this child a regimented same thing every day where there's no flexibility? And I'm sorry, that's not the way we educate, and we help our families. We help them to be flexible. We help the child to be able to eat the portions, and it might vary. They may go from eating a 45-gram carbohydrate lunch to a 60-gram carbohydrate lunch or a 75 carbohydrate lunch. It can vary from day to day depending on what the parent has and what they're packing, what the child may have, requested, or whatever it is. So no, I mean, I can't write down, but what I do encourage parents to do is to label the food. So that's going to be a day-to-day thing, where you have to be packing the lunchbox. I do say to make it easier to have a separate container for first break if it's a smaller break, and label that as first break, and a second container which would be for the lunch break. And every item in there is labeled. Then the child will go to the nurse, the foods will be taken out, what they're going to be eating, and the child is usually, I mean, if the parents understand the appetite the child has and they're established into a routine, which I'm a bit advocate of routine and establishing sort of knowing your child's appetite and what they tend to eat. So you don't want to be unrealistic and pack 80 grams of carbohydrate for lunch for your child and say, oh, half of it comes back. I'm like, well, probably because 80 grams of carbohydrate for lunch for your child was too much to begin with. So don't overpack it, don't underpack it. Try and understand like what is the usual routine. And I usually say use the week leading up to school to get into that time routine, like a similar sort of waking up time for breakfast, then you have the snack, then you have the lunch, so that you can see, well, how much carbohydrate do they tend to be eating, and then pack that amount, label it. They go to the nurse. In the beginning, you may want that phone call to happen, where the nurse goes, look, they're going to have their banana and they're going to have, just that, for example, or they're going to have their cucumber and carrots with some cherry tomatoes and some blueberries. And you've labeled it all up as 10 grams, for example. That's it, done. And lunchtime comes, they've picked out their sandwich and their yogurt and their fruit, and they're going to have that. And so they follow the dosing chart that you have, and they know how much insulin to be administered. So labeling food, I think, is a big one, not just depending on the phone call, because you just never know. If you get held up, you don't get the phone call, they don't call you, at least there's some information. And of course, going through the school plan with the dosing chart, the nurse is still aware of what to do in an emergency situation where the parents are not answering and the child needs to have their lunch, and they're more confident in knowing what to do, rather than being completely in the dark and just depending on the parent to tell them what to take and not knowing why they're taking what they're taking.
That is such good advice that yes, because sometimes, maybe you went to the washroom and your phone was on the desk and you missed the call. And then your child will end up having to wait for them to find you or you to come back to your desk. And then again, that fear of missing out. So that's really good advice.
Yeah.
Post-its, wait, virtual background. So I don't know if you could see it. Post-its are like the best friend for labeling. And it does help with the carb counting, and for small children, it helps the nurse. They don't have to look it up. But what I found also, now that my son does his own dosing and his own bolusing, he's on an insulin pump, is this label is there for him. He doesn't need anyone to oversee his dosing.
And you want that. You want your son to transition into that phase.
Exactly. And sometimes they would fall off, but always having everything labeled teaches your child how many carbohydrates is in something that they like to eat. And my son, my brain is old and full of probably useless information now. His is young and fresh. And he's like, no, Mom, it's this many carbs. And I'm like, are you sure? He knows. He knows the food and carbs. And even now he's at a point where he can sometimes eyeball a portion and get it really, really accurate. So it's an educational tool at the same time. So yeah, we did the same, separate snack, separate lunch, and everything was labeled. We also sent a notebook back and forth to school. And I started with just plain paper notebook. It would fall apart by the end of the year. And then I decided about 2 years ago to create a notebook that I call the Diabetes School Journal. Actually, I have one here.
I've got one here too.
Oh, you have one? Hey.
I think it's fantastic. I think it's a fabulous diary.
Thank you. Virtual background messes it up. So I'm going to talk about this because this is just the outline. Whatever you use is fine. And I also want to say that in times of COVID, and I think it's, not just from the school perspective, but from the government perspective, they don't want so much paper going back and forth and being exchanged. So you need to speak to your health office about what they're allowed per school guidelines to take back and forth. Now, this is quite medical, and it is important that you have it written down somewhere. Maybe you want to get a journal and you want to leave it in the health office. Actually, Sara gave me this idea. Leave it in the health office and have the health office scan it to you and send it to you at the end of the day so you can see what happened in your child's care. It is so, so very important that that is documented somewhere. I think having a CGM and seeing the number is one thing, but you also want to document why the number may have gone up or may have gone down. Did someone, someone in the health office misunderstand the directives and they're not giving the correct amount of insulin for some reason? Are they forgetting to do it? Are they overwhelmed and can't follow up? Or, if your child's involved in the care, is there something there that they need to be re-educated? So this will help you understand trends and things that are happening and what's going on. And yes, of course. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, you've got so many great tabs in this page where so much communication can be added in. So not just can you write down what the child ended up eating for the morning snack, how much carbohydrate was counted, what the glucose level was before, and how much insulin was given. You can also write down if there was correction doses given. So if you add up that this child needed an extra 1 unit of correction at lunchtime, and this is being tracked day after day after day, this is really important information for me. So when I am following up and I'm noticing that you as the parent are saying to me, based on the notebook that we have, they're requiring a correction every day at snack time. Well, I know breakfast is a problem. There could be not enough insulin given at breakfast. So your child is coming to school with really high glucose levels. And by the time first snack comes around, their sugars are really high. And you've indicated in the school plan that you want them to get a correction at snack time. So the nurse comes, collects the child at lunch, at snack time. The child's going to have their snack, but the glucose level is high. And based on the chart, they require a correction. So if that happens, once in a blue moon, that's a different story. But if it's a regular pattern that's occurring, then maybe the carb ratio needs to be changed at breakfast.
Yes, and that is one of the many reasons why I write down breakfast. While breakfast happens at home and not at school, it is important because those of you that have been doing this, for a while, we know that what happens at breakfast kind of sets the course for the day. And if the blood sugar is high, it's really hard to get it down. And I always found that giving my nurse notes of just like, hey, he woke up this morning on the low side, or he woke up on the high side. He's had a lot of insulin this morning, so you might want to ease back on the snack dose, so we can have that conversation. And if I don't see her, because, they do have hundreds of other students to deal with, so I may not have seen her in the morning, but at least the notes are there so that she can see it. And I've highlighted this journal is not dated, so you can use it anytime. And I've highlighted where in black are the things that the parents write down, and the green fields is where the nurse writes the stuff down. And as a parent, you need to write what the planned carbohydrates are that they're going to eat, and how, the planned food, how many carbohydrates. And then the nurse, especially for small children, can go and write what is eaten. Now, this journal is really designed for younger children, not necessarily those that are, doing their own care, and high school kids, certainly not. They're not really, going to go into that level of detail.
Sorry, Pam, the 16-year-old boy didn't like the idea of it yesterday.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, they won't. And, even my son's kind of like, but when my son was younger, he loved this. My son actually chose the design for this. So it's kid friendly.
I love
it. He chose it. There's also space for lunch. And then if they do after school activities, if there's anything or a PE happened that day, then And my driving reason for this, so before, years ago, I worked in hospital management. I was involved in quality management and hospital accreditations. And when we got to the medical record review, my favorite quote that I will never forget was, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And Sara, working in a hospital, may have heard this before, but this is like from someone in Joint Commission themselves. And I thought, isn't that so true? Because if it's not written down, and then you need to go back and find the history of why someone made a decision
Oh,
about your
documentation.
child's care that, yeah,
Absolutely.
that you didn't agree with. You need to really know why. And, you know, God forbid, if there's a time when you really disagree with what was happening, then you need that documentation for support. So it's super important. I'm not saying you have to use the journal. It's already formatted for you, but a regular notebook will work just fine as well. But just try to get them to write it down. I know one parent, she uses a spreadsheet. They have an Excel shared document. She's a statistician whiz. And so they do, you know, they do that. So do what works for you. Find something that works for you and the school, and go with it. But whatever it is, you know, make sure that you're getting it documented.
But just to go back to the day-to-day things, I mean, again, what you've got on that day-to-day page, that's what you've done. You've done a whole diary of day-to-day, and you've outlined in that, on each page, basically everything that will need to be done on a day-to-day basis. So the glucose levels, the carbohydrates, the insulin doses, what happens during PE, are they being checked? Is the glucose level being checked? What are the snacks that are consumed? Everything can potentially be documented on that page. And you don't have to collect all of that information every day if it's too overwhelming, or maybe your most important part is just the snack and lunchtime, you know, and potentially the PE. So you don't have to be like, oh, every single section needs to be filled in. No.
I know. No, some days it will be half full. Other days, there may have been some days where it was crazy, and it'll be more full, and the nurse will have a lot of notes to write. And nurses are trained to document. When they go to school, they are taught about medical documentation. So this kind of speaks to their profession as well. And there's also space at the end of each week, at the end of each 5 days, where you can go back and write notes and observations. And sometimes, I'll admit, sometimes at the end of the week, it is hard. You're exhausted. You are like full of diabetes. You're making lunches and snacks and labeling it and doing it all. And sometimes you need a break. But especially when the year starts, I find going to the end of the week and there's that empty page for notes. And a lot of us, you know, if you're using a CGM or a pump, you can download all this data. But what I do is I make a very simple graph for the 5 days, and I just draw the lines of my son's blood sugar, maybe not even charting it to the exact number. And I line them up, kind of a geek, but I line them up and I look at the trend. And if I see a spike after the snack, then I know that maybe the insulin might need to change after the snack. And that's something I'm like asking my doctor. So what do you think about this? It's a lot of effort.
You prefer your graph over the CareLink graph, do you, Pam?
Well, CareLink, you know, it's so funny. I was just kind of speaking with them this morning, and I said, yeah, I would take a training on the CareLink. But because I'm a Mac user, also, I struggle to upload it as much as I should. I love all that data, but it's overwhelming sometimes. So just as a quick, and I also like paper. I love paper. It connects when I write. So there's that. But again, whatever you use is great. And then also, if your child is older and they're participating in after school sports or some kind of activity, or sometimes on PE days, you might want to put an extra snack in there because they may need it depending on what time of day that is. So
can I just add on also about the older children? Again, just touching on my conversation with my 16-year-old boy that I saw yesterday. And he, you know, he's had diabetes for a number of years, and his school never asked for a care plan. So, you know, I was asking him, you know, is that something you want? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, look, it's, you know, we're just discussing the benefits of it. And I said, so how do you give insulin? He goes, oh, I just get to the nurse's office and I just dial up the dose. I show it to her and I take it. I'm like, okay, well, at least you're going to the nurse's office, number one. She's observing that you've taken insulin. She's seeing how much you've taken. And I go, is she documenting it? And he said to me, yes, she is. Okay, I go, all right, well, that's fine. She's documenting it. You know, he's engaged in his diabetes care. He's wearing a CGM. He has his regular follow-ups. So, you know, he's safe enough, I'd say. And, you know, teenagers they're definitely the most difficult age group to deal with. And so we have to always be a little bit more open-minded in how we listen to them and really take their opinions on how they want to self-manage.
That is so important. Like when my son, I felt he wouldn't need to carry something back and forth to the school he goes to now. And they do have their own documentation system. So they document everything. And I asked him, I said, do you think you need this? Do you want to do it? And he's like, no, you know. So I do definitely listen to him and I take his advice. Unless, of course, it's something that's going to affect his safety, his immediate safety, then for sure I'm going to step in as his parent. But I always say they don't have a lot of choices when it comes to type 1. So when it comes to like the kind of CGM that they want to use, you know, if your insurance.
Do they want alarms? Do they not want alarms?
Yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff. Then I try to be really, you know, open to that, and I let him choose. So that's kind of like most of the day to day is mostly around the food and getting the doses and everything. Now, when it comes to, you know, to the trickier part is the special situations and, you know, when it doesn't go as planned. So I think it would be good to get into some of the special situations that we have to deal with. At school, it might be a class party. It might be a sports or PE. It might be a field trip. It might be riding the bus, which is an everyday thing. But again, outside of the school, it might be actually a fire drill that's usually at your time of checking blood sugar or a snack. It might be, I know some schools started last year doing emergency lockdown training. And what do you do then? So there's a host of different things that happen week to week. Birthday parties. Some months I feel like every kid in the class has a birthday, like every other day. And
Are they not? I'm
donuts
sure.
are
I
coming in.
mean, are they? Haven't they? I mean, even before COVID, weren't they becoming a lot stricter about food coming into the classroom? I know blowing candles became a negative. Like you don't want to blow candles, and so I know. I'm pretty sure maybe it's a school by school thing, but I think there was a policy in our school: no food allowed on birthdays. So you
I
can bring in a
wish.
party bag, but you are not allowed to bring in food.
I wish.
Yeah.
And it is a school by school thing. And I would send, you know, something fun. But when my son reached kind of later primary years, it was always donuts.
Yeah.
I kid you not, like donuts. And we're not a house that really eats donuts, but donuts
Well, I
are
love
apparently
donuts.
they taste great, but for my physical being, they're not really great. So donuts were coming in a lot, and I was really blown away by this. But some schools don't allow it, some do. And we'll start with that topic right now. For parties, what do you do? As long as my son's blood sugar is in range, for me personally, I allow him to eat what his peers are eating. He eats very healthy the other 90% of the time. And while I'm not a fan of, you know, a lot of sugar and junk food, he's not eating like that every day.
Exactly.
And the doctor that I had in the US when my son was diagnosed here, but at that time I could not find any pediatric endocrinologists. I didn't know what to do. I went back home to the US and I was assigned to, I don't know if you've heard of his name, Sarah, Dr. Maury Heyman. He was one
Which
of,
state and which diabetes center was this?
in Texas Children's Hospital,
Okay.
a pediatric endocrinologist. He's done a lot of early research in glucagon mini dose injection and also insulin pump in small children, like when they first came out. I think he's kind of retired from seeing patients now.
Okay.
And I cried the day I learned he retired, like life changing. But the first thing he said to me was child first, diabetes second. I think that was the second thing he said to me after he said diabetes is going to really be a nagging thing and get on your nerves. And I thought, what a weird thing to say, but it was true. And I always carry that with me. And I remember child first, diabetes second. As long as, you know, his blood sugar is not through the roof, it's in range. We know how many carbs are in this thing. And I let him eat it. Was it perfect every time? Of course it was not. But we survived and we got through it. And now he knows how to handle those situations on his own. There is nothing, I think, more heartbreaking for a child. It's really difficult if you have celiac or some other things that you have to consider. And then, parents have been very, I know parents are very accommodating. They send in something that's gluten-free and other things like that. But if you don't have that challenge, it is very challenging. And it happens sometimes because people don't understand diabetes, that even the teacher, even though you've met with her, talked to her, educated her, and you said they can eat everything but poison, they still leave your child out because they're so used to thinking about, oh, type 2 and really strict diets and things like this.
But that's again why it's so important, I think, for the parents to have that communication with the teachers in the beginning. So you are the driving force of advocacy, of raising awareness about type 1 diabetes, that it's not because of their food or their diet that they got diabetes to begin with. It's not because of a lifestyle issue. This is because it's an autoimmune. I mean, and it may be difficult to explain it to them exactly how they develop type 1 diabetes, but basically they can eat what any sort of healthy nutrition plan should be for any child. And a healthy way of eating, I mean, we're going to get into that in a little bit, includes all food groups, and it includes treat foods occasionally as well. And so there is nothing, just like any other child can have treat foods, your child can have treat foods. One tip I would give for school parties is, think about, I mean, you mentioned donuts, and that was the first thing I thought of as well when you think about what gets brought into classrooms on birthdays. But think about the frequently brought in foods at birthdays. It's donuts, and donuts vary in size. So you've got mini donuts, you've got a sugar glazed plain donuts, and you've got iced donuts. Now, I've got my carbs and cows over here, and I'm sure many of you have the carbs and cows. These kinds of resources, whether it's this or whether it's MyFitnessPal, you can get information about. You can even find out how much carbohydrate is in a Dunkin' Donut or a Krispy Kreme or any of those Tim Hortons or whatever it is, and the sizes. You just need the general average of a mini, a plain, and a sugar glazed sprinkled donut. And you do the same with the cupcakes. You've got mini cupcakes, you've got medium cupcakes, you've got large cupcakes, and you do the same with a standard piece of cake. A standard piece of cake, triangular piece, sponge cake, iced or not iced. So the maximum, you're going to have about 8 to 10 items on a list. Keep it in the teacher's classroom. Put some glue tack on the wall and say, whenever a child comes in, just in case you can't call me or you can't WhatsApp me, if you're allowing your child to have the snack and you want insulin to be given, that's a reference point at least, so that they know how much carbohydrate is in the food.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I've never done that. And I had, they would call me and they're like, oh, it's Dunkin' Donuts and he wants to eat this one. And then I would look it up immediately and say, this is it, go for it. And initially I was still afraid, even though I looked it up. And sometimes what we would do is I would say, if the blood sugar was right in kind of the lower side of the in range, we might not give the entire bolus. We might not give the entire dose. And we might say, okay, try this because he's going to recess or PE, and maybe that'll drive it down. And let's check in again after PE or recess and see what it is, or give the whole dose. But most of the time they needed that entire dose for the donut. Another thing they would do for class parties, if it's end of year parties, I'm sure with COVID that won't be happening this year. So it's kind of a good year in that respect. There's less things to worry about there. There probably won't be kind of buffet parties where the kids go and pick up their stuff. But when that would happen, my son would pick his food and the teacher or somebody would send a picture of what he selected. And I would say, okay, this looks like this plate probably has about this many carbs. But in the case of kids' parties, they don't always usually eat everything that's on their plate if they picked it up in buffet style, if it's more than one thing. So you just want to be cautious if your child might be one of those that's like suddenly, going to his friends after picking up the plate and not eating all of it, maybe not dose for all of it. And also I would always ask, in the case of a party, they would always ask for 1 or 2 chaperones, and I was able to take off work and I would go help out with the food and chaperone the party.
I think that's a really important step as well, whether it be for class field trips or whether it be for volunteers on sports days or anything like that. If you have the ability to take time off work, or, you know, you're a stay-at-home mom, hats off to you, honestly. But I think, you know, try and be as involved as possible, because again, not only are you keeping a closer eye in these special situations, but again, it's an opportunity to raise awareness and advocate.
Yes, and I was lucky that I was working in the corporate world at that time, and they were understanding. I was constantly kind of following up with the school to be proactive, to know what the schedules were for sports days and things like that. They don't always know right away, and then kind of the notice comes. So you might want to ask them early about that. And
Yeah.
even on field trips where they say they wouldn't want chaperones, they were always kind of relieved that I went, because then the nurse didn't have to go, the
You can
teacher
ask.
didn't know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just by
there,
asking.
exactly. There is no harm in asking, and they will probably appreciate it. And you just, you know, I would go and I would be as invisible as I possibly could in the background. I would just sneak in and, you know, do my thing, do the dose. I mean, once I got to lead a group of first graders on a scavenger hunt, and that was more difficult than managing diabetes. Hats off to teachers that deal with, you know, large groups of small children, but it was super fun. So yeah, you can do that too if your job allows you, and hopefully they do, because that is so super important. Sports, I think, and activities like after school. We have a lot from the other day, the questions about, you know, exercise and sports with diabetes. We had a lot of questions. So we have a lot of young athletes and very active children.
Yeah.
What is your take on how we manage diabetes with exercise, PE, sports, and all of those things?
Yeah. It depends on what you agree on with. I mean, you need to know your child. You need to know how intensive their sport is, what they're doing, how long they're doing it for. Is it a set routine that they do their sports on? Like it's set sort of number of days of the week where they go, what time of the day, how long before they played sport had they taken a bolus for a meal? So are they playing while the insulin is during the active phase? Which is not usually advisable because you just don't know how rapidly the glucose is going to change in that environment. So if we're talking about school situation, I always ask, what time is the PE? Is it first thing in the morning? By the time they do it's probably at around 9. If they've had their breakfast at 6:30, then I'm not too concerned. I think, well, okay, the active insulin from breakfast is gone, and they'll be okay to play sports. And I always discuss with the parents what the guidelines recommend in terms of what the pre-glucose level should be before sports starts. Now, I understand the fear of hypos, and I really do listen to the parents. So it can range. It can be as low as 90 milligram before a meal, before participating in sports. But for some, it needs to be 100 or 120 because it just rapidly comes down. And so it can vary anywhere from about 90 to about 120 or 140, just depending on the child. And that's something you need to discuss with your diabetes team, so that, you know, it can be in the plan, so that way the teachers know exactly what to do. They will remind the child to check their glucose level. And if it is under that, then you always have a supply of snacks labeled with the sticker saying PE. You know, your child knows that this box that's in my bag doesn't get touched unless my glucose level is below a certain threshold before I play PE. So you do have lots of boxes. You have the hypo box, you have the PE box, and you have the normal snack and lunch box that comes to school as well. Is there any other boxes I'm not thinking of? No, that's it.
That's most of the boxes. And
Yeah.
that's a good segue into a picture that I will share. Where did it go again? Share my screen. So I had
Do you
this,
have all the food that is potentially in Aaron's bag?
not in Aaron's bag, but this is a picture from a few years ago of 1, 2, 3, 4. That's only 5 boxes that was going into 5 classrooms. That did not include the box. Now in the health office, there's medical supplies, there's pump supplies, there's insulin, there's glucogen, you name it, it's all there. And finger checking things, all of it.
And then you need to be an inspector that goes around to check the shortages and how much you need to restock.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah. And some of the, some of the teachers are good about telling the nurse like, oh, hey, we need more, especially PE. The PE box goes fast because that's where you might see the most hypos. But, and, I was never a Girl Scout, but I'm always over prepared. So the, 4 juices per box, but we had a set number, 4 juices, X number of date bars, X number of raisins. Back then he was younger, and those little purees that are in the bags, those were amazing. I was really kind of, my heart sank a little bit when he's like, Mom, I don't want to take those for snacks because they were so healthy and easy, but that's okay. But so that's an example of the boxes that I put in the classrooms to help with hypoglycemia. And I suggest having one in every classroom where your child is, because it keeps them from not having to go somewhere far like the health office or to another classroom to get it. And it just is less disruptive of their day.
And
now,
for the safety. So remember, we don't want
yes.
a child who's potentially having a lower glucose level. It could be a mild, could be a moderate hypoglycemic event, and they're having to go down a flight of stairs, for example. They might be unattended. So it's always better to discuss this again with the school to say that I need to keep a container in case my child is having a hypo. I don't want them going to the nurse's office. I want them treated in the classroom. And remember, you need 2 things for hypo. I always need to remind you what you need to take if it's a true hypo. So a true hypo under 70 milligram or under 4 millimoles, you need a rapid acting carbohydrate to bring it back up again, followed by a sustaining carbohydrate if the next meal is more than 30 to 60 minutes away, like roughly. So you potentially have to take both. So you always need to keep in your kit. I would suggest something like, as Pam has shown here, she's got juice. That's fine. I probably would want to go for the smallest I find available, only because I get scared that over treatment of hypo can occur. So if you can find something that's more like 120 to 150 ml, if they're possible to find. I haven't actually looked, but I remember someone bringing that in.
Yeah. The challenge with those, I find they're the less healthier ones, but again,
well, you don't necessarily want them to have the added sugar as well as the natural sugar from the fruit.
Yeah,
but you know what? If it's a hypo, you need rapid, you just take it, right? So
yeah, the way I did it, actually, I would have 2 types of juices, and one is kind of this organic brand. I forget the name, and I'm not really affiliated or plugging anybody. I forget the name, but that one has a lower carb count than the other juice. And I would teach everyone, and Erin knows this lower one is for like a mild hypo, and the bigger carb juice box is for a severe one. We also have in there some chocolate milk, because that's always not for treating hypos, but when you're getting for him, like a number at like 90, when he was active, in preschool especially, he would have a very small chocolate milk. Yeah. And that would kind of sustain his blood sugar and not cause a dip.
Milk as well. It can be plain. It doesn't have to be chocolate milk.
Yeah,
it can be an oat cookie or a wheat cookie. It could be a few pieces of dried fruit. Something that's going to have a longer shelf life. Obviously, you don't want things that have a expiry that's too soon.
Oh yeah, not everything that we put in there was long lasting, because in some classrooms he would never touch these boxes. One other thing I saw when I was pulling this picture that I wanted to share that I think is important to put on top of each of your boxes, especially if it's a big school, there's cleaners that come and go, and they might think, depending on where the box is stored, they may not realize that it's important. So I put this on the top of each box. It's just a simple piece of paper. I put a picture of my child, his name, the grade, his teacher, the teacher, not each teacher that he has for each subject. It was who his primary teacher was. And it's just kind of what, his symptoms are, his range for his blood sugar of what, or what his doctors defined medically as a low or a moderate low. And the emergency telephone number on here was actually the mobile phone for the health office that I actually don't have, and I never use it. But within the school system, sometimes all teachers might have the nurse on speed dial in case, there's like a nut allergy or a severe hypo. So ask your school, if you choose to do this, you don't have to, but you can ask your school, what is the emergency contact that the teacher needs to know in order to reach someone in the health office if it's a severe hypo and the nurse or someone needs to come to your child. So that's just a little, puts a little, and makes it, you know, how can I say, it helps them to understand also the seriousness of a low blood sugar. When someone sees that medical sign, then it registers quite differently than just like, oh, here's a snack box. It's, you know, for all of us, this isn't a snack box. This is like life-saving stuff right here. So that's just a little something else you can do. And I would say if anyone has children that ride the bus, mine never did. I always took them. And again, that was, you know, largely out of my fear of how am I going to manage diabetes on the bus. But some people do it, and buses typically have rules about children not being allowed to eat on the bus. And you have to meet, I suggest, maybe someone within the school, maybe it's the nurse or whoever in the school oversees the bus service and the bus communication, and whoever the bus driver is going to be and the helper on the bus, so that everyone is aware that this child needs to have maybe from time to time something to treat a low blood sugar, and it cannot wait until they get home. It needs to be treated then and there on the spot. Now here with the heat, you may not want to keep, you know, snack boxes inside a bus, but you want to make sure whatever bag your child has, that it's got some snacks or low blood sugar, something to treat low blood sugar in addition to what you're putting in the classroom. Okay, so then going to special situations, and if you have any other special class party situations, you know, for field trips, again, it's sending a small bag with low blood sugar, you know, supplies, juices, etc. The schools that my child's been in, for every child that has a special medical need, whether it's a nut allergy or something else, they would always give the nurse that was in charge of the particular bus or group that the kids were in, they would always give them the bag with every child that might have a need, all the supplies together. And just to make
I think that's really important that they offer a nurse to go on the field trip.
Oh, well, they don't always offer a nurse to go. There's just kind of a teacher in charge.
If they're not a nurse, I think the parents need to ask if they can attend at least. You know, if they're worried that the child is not independent enough to give the insulin, and the teacher, the teacher might say, look, I've known your child for a while now. I'm happy to supervise. If you just tell me over the phone what they need to take and your child's able to take the insulin, maybe that can also work. So it just depends on the stage of the diabetes, how confident your child is, and what the school is willing to do in terms of either allowing you to attend, or the teacher can supervise, or a nurse can come along.
Yes. And actually, I know, and it happens for, actually, as the child gets older, around usually age 11 or so, now again, with COVID, this is probably not going to happen, but there would be an overnight trip somewhere. And this is a big deal for a school because sometimes they go in different groups. Some parents have been told that they're not sending a nurse in the group that their child's in for whatever reason. And that is heartbreaking. Or they say, well, maybe, you know, maybe your child shouldn't go because there's no one to oversee it and we're not allowing parents to go or whatever. My answer to that is you need to advocate and advocate again and again for your child to go. Wherever you're living, there should be documented regulations that allow your child to go and to participate just like everybody else. There is no reason for your child. There is no reason for your child to not go. I think most people on this call are in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi, or in Dubai, and there is very clear outlined protocols. And like Sara mentioned earlier in the call, often under legal guidance, there's the word disability. And diabetes is covered as a disability within the eyes of the law. Diabetes is not a disability. We all know this. It's a superpower. Our kids have been given a superpower. However, should your child be denied certain rights, you need to go find those disability laws because that is what is protecting them. And it is okay in that instance to surrender to that word. Let's say, I hate that word disability, because our children are super able, very able. And it will help you advocate for your child to make sure that they are treated just like every other child that does not have diabetes. So that's super important, and kind of leads into, there's been times where things have not gone as planned. You can't mitigate every single risk. Not everything is going to be perfect. Not everyone is going to understand diabetes. And people, administrators, sometimes health office, sometimes teachers, they have a lot of fear around the unknown, because then as soon as they hear, oh my gosh, this child could go unconscious, this is really serious, what do I do? And what do you do in those instances where, someone says, no, I'm sorry, your child can't go on this field trip, or your child cannot participate in sports day or something? It's not a matter of if, but when. It will happen. And I always try to take a deep breath, and I know that those things are said, or those decisions are kind of made out of a place of fear, because they don't understand diabetes. So my advice is communication and follow-up are absolutely key. I try not to be reactive. I do write a lot of emails. I write, and I'll write something, and I'll even let it sit, and I'll go back and I'll read it to make sure that I don't sound really outraged, and I might change my language and different things, because I really want to be heard. I don't want it to come off as, outraged mom, even though inside I might be really outraged at something that happens. Don't be afraid ever to ask questions about the treatment that's given to your child, even though there are medical professionals, but at the end of the day, it's your child. You have a pediatric endocrinologist and a diabetes care team that have instructed you to do certain things. Sometimes someone may disagree with that because they've read something, or they've heard something, or they're not really sure. I had one, well-intentioned nurse once that my son came home with a blood sugar like 300 something. And I was like, what is going on? This is really strange. And then I followed up, and I didn't see, quite the documentation. And I looked back, and then I said, I talked to the nurse maybe the next day, and I just kind of said, what happened? And she said, well, he looked tired, so I gave him a juice box. No checking of the blood sugar. There was no CGMs back then. And those things can happen. So try to remain calm, go ask, learn why, because it may just be that they didn't really understand what needed to happen and what should have been done. And it might require, meeting again, talking about it again, even if you feel like you may have shared how to check, how to manage if they look a little tired, but just to make sure, double check the blood sugar first before treating. Those kind of things that seem so basic to us that we do every day. Again, the schools have hundreds of children to look after, and not just our children. So they can forget. I try to always, unless it's something really, really severe, and I've never had to go immediately to, a top administrator, but I always try to meet with the nurse or whoever administered the care first, understand their side of the story and what happened. If then after that point, you can decide if it's necessary to escalate to their boss. If there's a doctor that oversees the health office, then go there. Or if administration, like a principal or superintendent or somebody, needs to be informed, then you can do that and request a meeting. And take that school diabetes medical management plan. This is why it's so, so important to meet before school starts, get all of that documented, get them to sign it, because that is the document that you will speak to about your child's care and what was agreed upon at the beginning of the year. And again, this also relates back to why you want them to write everything down, because if it wasn't written down, then it didn't happen.
Yeah, and that's why we have the roles and responsibility of the school, and part of the roles and responsibility of the school is to provide those equal opportunities and to cater for all children. And again, I don't see your children as having disabilities, you know, they need extra points of care. They need somebody to monitor, to supervise and oversee. But you are responsible parents who have been following up with your healthcare team. You are well educated. You have it under control. Like, you've actually got it well under control. And you're basically trying to tell the school that we know what we're doing. Our child is fine, but we just want to make sure that you guys can also do the same and give our child that same opportunity. I mean, yes, when they talk about, and Pam sent me the document and I had a quick look at it today. And again, these disabilities they're referring to are children who have cognitive disabilities. They're children who have, whose academics is going to be affected. And, you know, the law wants to protect these children so that they can still have extra time in exams and etc. Your children, yes, they may be affected by their sugar levels. And we spoke about the effect, Pam and I, about how, you know, a low or a high can affect their concentration. Again, that's something we might need to review if you feel they need extra time in exams. So that's something, again, you need to discuss with your healthcare team, which can help support you in getting extra time. For example, if your child is having to require a glucose device to check their glucose levels during the exam time, or if they have a hypo during the exam and that makes them have to stop and take treatment, and therefore they've lost time in the exam, so they should be allowed that extra time. So that being under that scheme allows you to utilize it to your advantage. But certainly, you know, they don't have a disability. I mean, it's
yeah, no, not at all. And if you're coming tomorrow, you'll see it's a superpower, because we have a superpower panel. And we have a team Nova.
Am I not superpower panel?
You are a super force in your own right. You are a force. So yeah, really, the more people I meet with type 1 diabetes, the more, you know, the first question you ask when your child's diagnosed, will they be okay? Will they be able to do everything? They will be able to do everything and so much more. It's just really, really amazing. But these laws that exist, and they use that word disability, don't be afraid of that word. And, you know, very rarely, and hopefully you'll never be in a situation where you need to escalate it to a regulatory agency or anything like that. But if you do not be afraid, because they are there to help. And we're lucky where, you know, if you're here and you're in the UAE, and, you know, we had the year of tolerance and all these other things, and there's so many different cultures here, and people are so open-minded, and, you know, most schools are really helpful and supportive. So that's, you know, really great. And see, Sarah, look, we got 15 minutes for questions.
Great.
So we kept talking, and there's some questions in. So I'm going to start from the bottom up. And just one thing I do want to say that you mentioned before we go there about testing. I had read about people, you know, children in high school and things with blood sugars and testing. And it wasn't until my son had one test and he felt he didn't do so great because of his blood sugar. So last year or the year before was the first time that I put in his plan was, could, you know, he please check his blood sugar 15 minutes before any testing. So that way, if it was borderline that it might go low, he could eat something before the test, and then he wouldn't have a hypo during the test, because nobody can concentrate when they're having a hypo, or that he can check in if his blood sugar's high, then he can give a bolus. So as your children get older, that is an important one, because it won't, you know, it's not that they have a cognitive challenge, but to concentrate with a low blood sugar is really, really difficult, especially low blood sugars. So to our questions, can you talk about the hypo, take fast acting sugar, and if the next meal is after 30 to 60 minutes, what should we give? So if I understand the question correctly, if you have like a hypo and then they took some fast acting sugar, but they're going to have a meal 30 to 60 minutes after that hypo, what should you do?
Yeah. So basically the steps of hypoglycemia management is that you, depending on the child's size and weight, etc. I mean, the exact hypograms that you require and the quantities that you require should be outlined in the school plan. So depending on the weight, it could vary from 5 grams needed of rapid acting glucose to 15 or 20 grams of rapid acting glucose. And so that will be specified and the quantity will be translated. So whether it's 50 ml, 100 ml, 150 ml of juice, etc., to what is equivalent to that rapid amount of glucose. So once you confirm there is hypoglycemia, you treat it with the appropriate amount of rapid acting glucose, and you wait about 10 to 15 minutes to see where the glucose level goes after that. So if after 10 to 15 minutes, the glucose level has risen to like above 80, it's about 85 or above, then you can say your child is now in a safe level. And then you got to ask, well, how long until the next meal? So if lunch is coming up in about 30 or so minutes, then it's unlikely they're going to redip again. It's likely they're going to be sustained for a little bit longer before they redip, and there's no need to top it up with an extra snack like a piece of fruit or a biscuit. However, if the meal is more like an hour or so away, then you may want to give an extra sustaining carbohydrate. So it doesn't mean extra juice, it means giving whatever you've got in your hypo kit that is a sustaining carbohydrate. It can be a piece of fruit, it can be a 200 ml or 250 ml plain milk, it can be a couple of plain cookies or biscuits, just to keep them sort of steady until the next meal comes, which could be a while away.
Great. And another question. So my son is 7.5 and was diagnosed in April of this year. It's his first time in school while being type 1. Yeah, kind of having that COVID lockdown, that gave you time to learn your way around diabetes, although not easy with COVID, without COVID. But now this will be his first time in school. Okay, so this is a 4-part question. I love it. Is there a certain level of blood glucose to maintain in school? So that's the first one.
No, there is no certainty. You can't, because obviously the child is coming into school soon after having breakfast. There's going to be a change happening in their glucose level just while they're driving in the car to school because they've had active insulin on board. So what you drop off your child with their glucose level when you drop them off at the school gate is going to change then an hour later. Then they're going to have a snack. That's going to change again. So there's, diabetes, the curve for diabetes, I always say it's a bit like a roller coaster, but what you don't want is a spiky roller coaster, and you don't want it to go too high or too low, but it's normal for it to go a little bit up and down. And the question is, how low does it go? So what is a normal level of a lower limit? What is a safe lower limit? Around the 100 mark, is always nice to sort of see that. You get nervous as a parent if your child was always traveling between 70 and 80 and 90 constantly, then you may worry that with the extra activity, they might have a hypo. But wearing CGM, wearing these devices gives you a lot more confidence to wait and see, just to see, but again, being newly diagnosed and relatively newly diagnosed, I can understand that you'd want the glucose level to be between 100 and 120 for you to feel a lot more secure. And it is a nice number for it to be between meals at that number. Of course, once your child does have a meal, it's normal for it to go up, but the question is, how high does it go up? And that will depend on the dose of the insulin that they're taking. So just keep track of it and review and review and review.
Yeah, review and review. And I promise you, Rola, no 2 days will ever feel alike. Sometimes you can do the same thing on different days and get different results. But with the CGMs, with the arrows, huge difference in anticipating what might happen. But it'll vary. And also, ask your doctor what they suggest is the good range for your child, because they see all of your child's numbers and history and understand if there's a honeymoon and phase and how much of that's happening. So when Sara and I met and we were talking about different scenarios, and we're like, well, it depends. Almost every answer to every question is, well, it depends. Second part of that is the type of snacks to keep going if on a low level.
So when you say low level, I mean not hypo, but on the lower end of a normal range. So it could be, for example, 80, Again, it depends. So, you're looking at if your child is wearing a CGM, how much confidence do you have in the CGM and the arrows that are showing? If it's 80 and the snack time is coming up, Do you have to rush to give them a snack before snack time comes? Probably not. Um, it really just depends. I mean, if the arrow is pointing down and it's 80, yeah, you may take a more proactive approach and have a sustaining snack, not a fast acting carbohydrate, just a sustaining snack. So it could be that piece of fruit, it could be a few pieces of apple, just to sort of bring it back up a little bit, so it's not 80, it can go up to 90 or 100, where you feel a lot more comfortable. So it depends on how soon the next scheduled school mealtime is. It depends on the arrow that is on board. And again, if you're constantly seeing that the sugars are dipping by themselves, they're constantly dipping, go back and speak to your diabetes team. It's likely there needs to be a review of the insulin doses. And again, if your child is in a honeymoon phase, it's likely the doses need to be reduced even further. He or she would be on less insulin than required because they're in a honeymoon phase.
Next question. My son cannot eat breakfast early morning, always has a cracker, and then during snack time at 9 a.m. will eat breakfast. Is that acceptable?
Acceptable is very subjective, you know. Do I prefer a breakfast at home? Yes. And I think it depends on how rushed you are in the morning. And then you got to ask yourself, why is my son why is my child so rushed in the morning, you know? And then it goes back to how many hours of sleep are they getting and what time are they going to bed? And, you know, it's a whole other conversation to sort of talk about why breakfast is not commonly consumed at home. But for many reasons, it could just be just no appetite, for example. Then yes, it's acceptable to have, but the question is, how quickly will they need to have that first meal? Like, how long is that break, and can you fit, you know, enough food to sustain a proper breakfast at 9 a.m. and is there enough time to go to the nurse to give insulin at that time? So you need to look into the school schedule to see if that's something that you can work with.
Yeah, I not giving like medical advice, but I think it really depends on what's happening at school. Is there actually snack time at 9 a.m. or is your child going to be missing out in some other social activity to eat? And then, like Sara pointed out, I was shocked at the very little time to eat, even for lunch. It's very short time. 15 minutes for a snack is like nothing. And if that's when you're going to have breakfast, 15 minutes is really short. So you might want to look at just kind of the overall day and see what you can do and what works best for your child, and not just for their blood sugar, but socially and just, you know, generally eating balanced, I would say. And, oh, I like this question. The school nurse has changed and he would be shy and worried to be injected by the new nurse. Would it help in preparing low carb breakfast to avoid injection at school for snack time, or would it backfire? Dun, 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 dun. My first thought on this, what I want to say to everyone, whatever the age of your child, take them with you when you have this initial meeting with the school. When you sit down with the teachers, with the health office, it will really help them feel comfortable to talk about diabetes with all of those adults. It won't feel so scary. And much to my surprise, even last year, when we were having the meeting and I was talking about the signs of hypoglycemia in my son, and he actually stepped up and he's like, well, you know, Mom, I actually have this happen more than this. And I was like, wow, okay, that's great. So he started to kind of get involved in the conversation. So it's really good to get them involved in it, and then they won't feel so shy about it because they have to learn to trust that person that is their caretaker at school.
Yeah, I think if it was outside of COVID times, I had one mom who sort of shadowed the nurse for a week. She took time off work and she just stay in the nurse's office. She actually didn't want her son to see her there, so she was sort of hiding, but she was sort of almost like mini training the nurse on what to do, how to read the dose, how to look at the labels of the foods that she was giving, how to count the carbohydrates and give the appropriate doses, what is a normal glucose level, not to freak out about, you know, this level or this level. So it really just helped her, I guess, feel more comfortable with her child going to school and having the nurse take care of the child. Now in COVID times, you may not be able to. I mean, you can certainly ask, maybe you can get that special consideration. but I wouldn't know. Now, in terms of giving a low carb breakfast to avoid injection at school, again, this is probably why I advocate breakfast at home, because at home you can give the carb and you can give the insulin and you're there for it. So when the child is having breakfast at 7 a.m. or 6:30 a.m., you're there for it. By the time 9 or 9:30 or 10 o'clock, whatever time that first snack time is, which is a very short time, comes, I then give that option to parents and say, look, if you prefer to give a lower carb snack at that time, you can. And we can discuss whether they want corrections to be given or not. Hopefully no corrections will be needed because the right amount of insulin was given at breakfast, generally speaking. And then you've got a lower carb snack that can be given, which you don't have to worry necessarily about an injection at that time. And then you can save the next injection, or hopefully the first injection of the day, at the lunchtime. So that would be the better way to do it. Now, if again, breakfast is not an option at home and the injection at the snack, you can't give no breakfast, no carbs first snack, no carbs again at lunch, and then the first carb meal is at home when they come home. I feel like for a child's requirements, which 7.5, we're talking about roughly anywhere from 160 to 210 grams of carbohydrate a day. How are you going to give it all at the second half of the day? And provided they're going to bed at around 8 o'clock, talking about from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m, jam-packed 5 hours, trying to get all their requirements in at that time. The child is likely to be very hungry back then. At that time, it is likely to backfire. So the longer you leave it, the more it's going to backfire. I just feel like it's not a more balanced way of providing food. And if it's something he has to do because you're worried about the injection or he's worried about the injection, you got to get over that boundary. I feel like from experience, if we keep saying, okay, fine, just so you don't get an injection, it becomes a habit, and it's not a healthy habit. So rather than just saying, okay, fine, we're going to try and give low carb, and he probably really looks at his friends and wishes he could have carbs, I would, as Pam said, involve him a lot more, get him to warm up to the nurse, and then hopefully he'll be able to get over that barrier.
Yeah, it's so much social as it is everything else. And for us as parents, and I feel you, like every parent in this call knows that feeling. It is really terrifying, and you don't want to make the wrong decision, have the wrong doses, or have your child struggle, at school with this. But initially, it's just kind of trial and error, and most likely they're going to be okay. I had so many concerns about my son in school and how it would work and what to do. And Sara, you can say now, 2 parents that have sat in the school, because I did that once too, to just kind of, educate a nurse. And I'm sure during COVID, I would not be able to do that, which that reminded me what.
I would do that as well. I think I'd become best friends with everybody. I'd become best friends with the principal, the teachers, the cafeteria ladies, nurses, everybody. I'd have to be that kind of mom. I'd have to be that kind of parent where I'm known in the school and liked in the school. I'm not saying you have to be friendly just for in a way, yeah, you do. You got to be thinking about your child. And so, yeah, having good relations and not just having good relations without educating, but the two comes together. You can't just be a friendly face. You've got to be a friendly face, but you also got to say, hey, by the way, just more facts. The more you keep giving them information, the more they have.
Yes, that's true.
Build on that as time goes on, and you're raising that awareness, and you never know the conversations they're having with their people they know when it's World Diabetes Day, and they say, but you know what, there isn't just type 2 diabetes, and no, it's not because of what they ate, and because you have instilled so much education and awareness in them that it is what do they call it, it's a chain effect. It's happening. You don't know how much you're dispersing so much awareness and education that's helping you immediately with your own child, but it's helping all other families as well that are also in similar
That's
positions.
true. And that teacher somewhere down the road is going to end, not if, when, we'll have another type 1 in their class, and they will know so much because of their experience, right?
I had to have a conversation with a school nurse for a parent in Abu Dhabi. The nurse herself had type 2 diabetes, and she was passing on judgments and assumptions that were incorrect. And so I had a very pleasant, probably took about 45 minutes at the end, phone call, just explaining the differences and the requirements and how you can't expect a child, but how come they take so much of this insulin or whatever, and why they, you don't understand that this is a different stage in the diabetes or the age group, or, you know, even the carbs. I'm like, you know, oh, but they're eating, you know, isn't that too much carb for a child to be eating? I'm like, no, that should, you know, when you're an adult, you can go lower carb, let's say, you can be restrictive, you can, but we don't encourage a child to be at that kind of restriction as well. So she can't just assume that because she's doing something drastic, okay, and she can safely do so, because she's not going to end up with, you know, having ketones and all the rest of it. She can't assume that the child has to be the same as her. So, you know, just having that, in the end, she was like, how do I come and see you?
Yeah, it's eye-opening for sure. Type 1's very, very different. We are 2 minutes after 5 o'clock, and I cannot believe how quickly this call has gone. Again, I think Sara and I could sit here and speak another 2 hours easily, but I'm going to wrap it up. And I just want to leave you with, you know, the thought during these times of COVID, and everything is uncertain for everyone. And if you cannot meet face-to-face with your child's teachers or nurses or whoever that you need to meet with, do it virtually. Ask to do Zoom, Google, whatever. You can still, it will be just as effective. If they say, no, we're not letting parents in, then say, okay, when can we schedule that Zoom call? Don't give up just because we're not able to meet face-to-face. And I am, you know, giving a lot of grace this year. Like usually by now I'd be more prepared. I have the boxes ready and all these different things by now, but with COVID, I know that it's a completely different situation and environment for the teachers and the health office. So initially they've got a lot more on their plates this year. And, you know, just give them some grace in the beginning as they get used to their new situations and we get used to ours. If you have any follow-up questions, as always, please feel free to send them, ask them anything that you need, or if it's something specific for Sara, I'll send it to her and get back to you. Thank you all for joining and for the questions. They were really good. Sara, if I'm forgetting anything, please let me know. And thank you
very much. It was a great space and it's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Good luck, everyone. Good luck.
Yeah, and thank you for dedicating your life to supporting people like us. Really, your work means so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Have a great afternoon, great evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. And come tomorrow and bring your kids. The panel, everyone on there has type 1. They are superpowers. It's a force. It's going to be a great panel. So I hope to see you all tomorrow. Thank you for coming.
Reading all the comments. Yeah. Thank you all for the comments. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.